in studio once again here on the show, kind enough to stick with us for the entire hour as we are going to stroll down memory lane of what took place 37 years ago. 37 years ago yesterday at the Olympic Games in Lake Placid, New York. The miracle on ice, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Al Michaels.
The myth.
Good to see you, sir.
Mainly the myth, Rich.
Good to see you.
Good to
How
see
are you,
you,
Al?
too,
Good to see you. So let's get right into it. How often do people, even with so much that you have done, football, baseball, come up to you and mention the miracle on ice to you, Al?
A lot, and it's great because they're normally glowing, and I get a lot of enjoyment when a father who was alive at the time and remembers it comes up with his son or his daughter, and you can tell that the kid obviously wasn't alive at that time, but the father has passed down the story of what happened in Lake Placid. The child may have seen the HBO documentary, which they did in 2000, which was tremendous.
Tremendous.
The movie has given it an entire new life, the movie Miracle, and a lot of high school and junior program coaches tell me that they use that very often the night before the game or before the game as
the movie
as an inspirational piece. And even professional teams have gathered the teams the night before and played the movie Miracle because it is so inspiring and all of that. So I get a lot of it from people, and it's really great because I've said this many times. A lot of the things that people remember, you remember where you were. If you're old enough, Pearl Harbor, obviously, Kennedy's assassination, the Challenger blowing up, certainly September 11th, 2001. They're all terrible things. But people who remember where they were February 22nd and 24th of 1980, it's a happy memory. And how many things do you remember in your life that were so joyous and you can say exactly where you were? That's what the miracle was.
And so, and then one of the beautiful things about that movie, Miracle, which, by the way, the makers of which had you and Ken Dryden, who's going to join us next here on the show, recreate in many ways what you were calling in those two games, that it puts in perspective what it meant for the country, what the country was going through at the time, the Cold War and the height of it, and how the boycott of the Olympic Games of the United States in Russia, that was the Summer Games, and what that meant for the Olympic Games in 1980. All of that. What was it like, Al?
Well,
can you put it in perspective?
There was so much going on. You go back to the late 60s and early 70s, we were a fractured country in terms of Vietnam. And patriotism was not really in vogue during the early 70s. You had a lot of things going on. Then you had the gas shortage in the 70s. You had Nixon resigning in the 70s. You had a crime rate that was close to 20%, close to in 1980. The country wasn't very happy with Jimmy Carter. Our hostages were being held in Iran. We really didn't feel that good about each other as a country. And so you have all of this confluence of events taking place with an Olympics on your home soil and a bunch of college kids, basically, in effect, meeting an amateur team, but we all knew what they were. They were all listed as soldiers and as students, the Soviet team, but they were hockey players. They were the best hockey players in the world. And this came at a time before the Soviets were allowed to play in the National Hockey League. And we saw how good they were when, in 1989, 1990, Fetisov came to Detroit and the rest of them came in. We saw how great they were. And so all of a sudden, this young team, this fuzzy-cheeked group beats the Soviets in our country. And it brought everybody together in a way. It kind of galvanized the country. And, Eddie Swift did the piece in Sports Illustrated at the end of the year, Sportsman of the Year, and he ended it by saying, it made you want to hug your television set, which is a great way to put it.
And of course, the one, I guess, who personified in a way that patriotism by draping the flag over his shoulders and his dad being in the crowd. Jim Craig's going to join us at the bottom of this hour. I've got Al Michaels here on the Rich Eisen show. And yet how did you get tapped for this gig, Al?
Well, I got tapped for the gig because when I joined ABC Sports full-time in 1977, I was the new kid on the block. And we had a murderer's row of broadcasters. Howard Cosell, Jim McKay, Chris Schenkel, Frank Gifford, Keith Jackson, Bill Fleming, you name it. I mean, all household names, all had been there for a long, long time. So when it came time to dole out the assignments for Lake Placid, what I really wanted was speed skating because the big hero in the Olympics was going to be Eric Heiden, who was expected to win 5 gold medals, and he did. So that was going to be the premium event. I knew I wasn't going to get figure skating. That was McKay's domain. I knew I probably wouldn't get alpine skiing because Frank Gifford and Bob Beatty always did that, and they enjoyed the après ski scene. And Roone Arledge, being Frank's great friend, made sure he got that. So I wanted speed skating, but if I couldn't get speed skating, keep me inside. I don't want to do biathlon. And so they had a meeting in New York among the executives a few months before, and somebody said, you know, Michaels has done a hockey game. So I had done one.
One.
And nobody else on the staff had done any. So I won the game 1-0 to nothing to nothing. And that's how I got to the hockey.
You shut him out. You shut him out.
He shut everybody out. 1-0 in triple overtime.
Right. And then obviously the event itself. What was that day like going against the Russians? That this team that had been smoked by the USSR in Madison Square Garden, what, just about a month before?
No, less than that, about 2 weeks before. On the Saturday before the Olympics opened up, the Olympics opened up on a Tuesday night. We tied Sweden Tuesday. So 72 hours prior, the Soviets had beaten the U.S. team 10-3 at the Garden. I mean, 10-3 doesn't really tell the story of the game. It looked like 20-0. I mean, that's how dominant the Soviets were. So remember that day, it was exciting because the U.S. had done extremely well in the preliminary round. 4 wins, no losses, 1 tie. To set up this game on a Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. And I remember Kenny and I, and we'll have him on the phone here shortly. I remember we were staying at the Lake Placid Hilton. The arena was 5 or 6 blocks away. We're walking over there 1:45. And I remember thinking and pretty much saying to Kenny, you know, if it's only like 3-1 in the mid-second period, late second period, that's about all we can ask for. But what I really feared was 7-0 Soviets, you know, as we start the second period. So all I'm thinking about is keep it close, keep an audience, have a little fun. But in terms of drama, no way. Because I had seen the Soviets play so much. Kenny had played against them. We knew what they were. And to me, when people say, well, did you anticipate, you know, the U.S. winning? I said, are you crazy? I anticipated the Soviets blowing us out again. And then all of a sudden you have a game in which, and of all the statistics, Rich, in that game that, you know, people forget about, but it really speaks to how the flow of that game went. The Soviets outshot the U.S. 39-16. And the U.S. won the game 4-3. So what does that tell you? 2/3 of the game, maybe 75% of the game, was played in the USN in front of Jim Craig. And the 16 shots that we got, 4 of them went in. How often will that happen?
Never.
You get outshot 39-16, you win the game.
And Jim Craig will be joining us here shortly. Ken Dryden first. When did you come up with Do You Believe in Miracles? What's the genesis of that, Al?
Out of my heart at the moment, because there's no way the U.S. was going to win the game. And as the clock is ticking down, I'd never worked in a more intense state of concentration. Because, first of all, the building is rocking and physically shaking.
And Heiden was there, right?
We had sneaked Heiden in, and Heiden's on the platform behind us. Because Eric was a huge hockey fan. It was the least we could do. The guy had won 5 gold medals. We get him into the game.
Right.
But we're on a rickety platform, which is in the front part of the balcony. So the building is shaking. The platform almost feels as if it's coming down. The crowd is crazy. I've got a producer in my ear who's just, you know, yelling gibberish and garbage into my headset. I wanted to, you know, take my headset and throw it off. That would have been fun. And as the puck comes out to center ice with about 5 or 6 seconds to go, all I was really thinking about in the last minute, hey, call the game because the Soviets could score. And how stupid would it be if I had said something, as I said, and the Soviets scored to tie the game with a second to go. So when the puck comes out to center ice, I just remember the word miraculous coming into my head. Somehow it gets morphed into a question, and I answer it with yes, and that was it. So if you had said to me 2 minutes after the game, what'd you say at the end of the game? I couldn't have remembered. I was just doing the game. I was doing the game. And somebody said, somebody once wrote, it's probably the 9-year-old boy in me coming out, and I'll buy that.
And I mean, for the rest of the history of sports broadcasting, now everybody's got to come up with a line. you did put that bar pretty high, Al. Every single time that there's a big ending of a game, you're wondering what somebody's going to say from the sports.
And you know what? It's more of a curse than anything else in the sense that in 1980 there were no VCRs, DVRs.
This was tape delayed, right?
This was tape delayed, but on top of that,
that's right.
You're never calling anything and saying they're going to play this back forever. You're doing it's a one-off. Mm-hmm. It's on tape, but there's no YouTube. There's nothing. You're not thinking about that. Now, of course, at the end of a game, I try not to overthink what to say. Let it go. I mean, I did a Super Bowl, a couple of years ago where Malcolm Butler intercepts a pass from Russell Wilson at the end of the game. Obviously, everybody remembers the game. And how you what line do you come up with? I mean, I go into the University of Phoenix Stadium thinking that Russell Wilson will throw an interception at the end of the game and the Patriots will win. So you can't. There's no way you think about things like that. So what came out of me at the end of the play, I blurted out unreal, which was what my emotional feeling was at that point. So you can't think of something to say beforehand because otherwise it'll sound scripted and not dynamic.
What was the last time you saw or spoke to Ken Dryden, who's joining us shortly?
Actually, a couple of weeks ago at the NHL All-Star Game.
He was one of the 100 players.
He came out here, and we had we were down in the underneath the stands at Staples Center. And we spent a half an hour laughing and carrying on.
Talking about what's on the screen right now, you in those blue sweaters that you wore with
How about that
back in the
collar,
day in 1980?
What a look.
The collar out. You're a collar out
like
guy.
that?
And you had the fro going on too, Al, right?
I had the fro. I had everything going on. Look at that.
Oh, you're a big Kings fan, and we always think of this from the American angle. A lot of Russian hockey players have succeeded in the league. Have you ever spoken with any of them? Ovechkin, Bure, Fedorov, anyone from their side of this?
In fact, I had the great honor and opportunity at the Sochi Olympics 3 years ago, almost 3 years ago to the day. And Vladislav Tretiak, the great goalie, who was pulled at the end of the first period, and they brought in Mishkin, and that's how we wound up winning the game in effect. So Tretiak was, in fact, he lit the cauldron that night on the opening ceremony in Sochi. And I said, is there any way we can get him into the studio? And we did. And he came in, and we had an interpreter, but he spoke English well enough so that I was able to talk to him about that. And I'll never forget him saying that the American hockey is, these guys created it, and everybody playing hockey in this country right now owes a tremendous debt to that team. And I said to him, you guys won, constantly. You weren't in a position where you really ever lost anything that was serious or big. And what was it that you guys are thinking as you're waiting on the blue line for the ceremonial handshake at the end of the game, and the U.S. team, and they're going so wild that nobody's even standing up. They're all falling over each other on the ice. And Tretiak said, they looked like the happiest people in the world. We wished we were them. I thought that was great. And then the other thing I got to do, when Tretiak came into the studio in Sochi, by chance, Dan Patrick was doing a show simultaneous with ours, and Jonathan Quick, the Kings goalie, was in the building, and he was going to go on Dan's show, and Jonathan had won the Stanley Cup 2 years prior. And I ran into Quick, and I said, would you like to meet Vladislav Tretiak? And his eyes got wide. He goes, of course. And I almost felt in a way, I think I wrote this in the book, it was almost like introducing Derek Jeter to Babe Ruth. It was a lot of fun.
Al Michaels here in studio. I thought you were going to say Tretiak said he did not believe in miracles when it all came down
He
to it.
believed
Yet.
in debacles.
Yet.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.